My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. In 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Welcome back into the studio, guys. Barry Boz Gray, Royal Marine Commando, explorer, adventurer. I don't think there's anything that he hasn't done. Thank you so much for coming into the studio this week and having a talk with us.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for reaching out, and looking forward to it.
So we have a lot, like we always say, we have a lot to talk about, but I want to go back to your youth where we always started out. Now, your father was in the military, so you were always kind of around that life. Can we talk about your young life, how you kind of got into this? Because you joined, I think, the earliest of anybody that has ever been on the show. You were 16 and had finished the Commando course before you were 18, but possibly before you were 17. Can we talk about your young life and what kind of got you down this path?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad was in the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, which is a sort of a Northeast Army infantry regiment, and my life was one of, many, many months and years of travelling. We very rarely settled anywhere for more than a couple of years, and I think it was something I enjoyed. In the army, in the UK military, when regiments move around a lot, everybody tends to go together. So all of your friends move with you as well. Unlike in the Royal Marines, individuals tend to move around, so you tend to keep your families stuck in one place. But in my childhood, as I grew up, all my friends moved with me, which made, I suppose, travelling a lot easier, and it made it a bit more of an adventure. Popping up in this new place every couple of years, and not just around the UK, but quite often abroad. I think my father's regiment was a very good one for looking after the kids and the families. They used to put on a lot of clubs. They always had something going on for us to do. Whether it be caving clubs or climbing clubs or surfing or swimming or Cub Scouts, and I just sort of really bought into that outdoorsy world of just adventure and playing outside. If my mother ever came looking for me, to call me in for dinner or tea or whatever, she'd end up looking up as opposed to down the street, because I'd be on a roof somewhere or I'd be up a tree climbing something. And I used to just love being outdoors and playing. And eventually we ended up in a place called, everyone will know, a small island called Cyprus, which has a big military presence, a big UK military presence, has done since the sort of 60s, 70s. And I was 14 years old. I was in a school called St. John's, just outside Episcopi, near the army barracks where my dad worked. And this group of people were visiting one day, and they were called these Royal Marine Commandos. And although I was surrounded by military, I didn't really have a clue who they were. I hadn't really bought into, what kind of organisation they were, the types of people they were. And I signed up to spend the day with these guys. They were like the recruitment team. We still have these people today that go around schools and, and younger organisations to show people who they are and what they do, and, potentially to try and recruit. And I just saw something in them that I'd never seen in anyone before. Just the way they held themselves, the way they spoke, the things they showed me that they were all about and what they did, and something just clicked, and I went, I was 14 years old at the time, and I went home that evening and told my father I wanted to join the Royal Marines, and he was just like that. Wow, well, where did this come from? And 2 years later, I'm not even 16. I'm 15 years old, and what the Royal Marines do before you join is they send you on what we called a PRC back then. It's changed slightly now, but it was called a PRC, a potential recruits course. I was still at school when I went on this as a 15-year-old, and passed it. somehow, and if they then give you a date to join. And for me, yeah, as you said at the start, there it was not long after my 16th birthday. I've started the toughest military infantry training course in the world, and it was just an incredible ride at the time.
I have to ask you something though, because I know about your childhood. You were a quiet child. You were in the outdoors and stuff a lot, but you weren't really an outspoken kid or anything like that. And I've heard that when you told your dad about that, he, of course, asked you where that came from. And was there ever any doubt there? Did he try and steer you in another direction, or did he completely get behind you on that? Because as you said, the training that you're about to start is grueling. He would know that personally from him being in the military and just knowing what's going on. Was there support from the very beginning, or was there a cautionary tale to you maybe?
Oh, definitely was. He was very surprised. And yeah, I was the sort of guy who had quite a small but close social circle, so I wasn't the sort of person that had a huge group of friends. And I was shy. I was quiet. I would get emotional very easy if I was surrounded by negativity or told off for something. And yeah, probably exactly the sort of child visually that you would not link with someone who was going to choose a career in the Royal Marine Commandos. And yes, my dad, I would imagine, did have doubts. But this is where I started to discover this inner strength, this inner belief that people couldn't see. I think I just had this natural mindset that would drive me towards tougher, more adventurous things, even though as a person and as a personality to meet, you would never put the two and two together, if that made sense. It was just something that's, I think, in my head, and I had this persistence and drive even back then, to go and do these things that I knew would be, extremely tough and challenging. And sometimes the doubting may be what pushed me a little bit. Okay, you think I can't do this, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm even more determined to do it now. So I don't think my father was really against the idea. He was, I would say, surprised. Once he got his head around the idea, then he became supportive, and ultimately it was my parents that had to sign the paperwork and take me to the careers office in Bristol in the UK when we moved back to the UK. To take me for my initial interviews. So yeah, definitely a surprise, but we got there in the end.
Let's take a second part to that. You also said that you surrounded yourself with a very small group of people. You were shy. You weren't really outspoken. Fast forward into your career, being a commando, that's a very small unit, very much a small group of people working together for a common goal. Do you think that as a child helped you throughout that career of being surrounded by that small, intense family unit? Do you think it helped you out in your career?
It may well do. So I think unlike in the British Army, I may have turned out to be a different person. If you join the army over here, then you would, which was the natural direction in which I would have gone. Like both my brothers ended up joining the army. It's what I was surrounded by, and all of a sudden I'm going this other direction. Yes, it's the UK military, but it's a completely different look, touch, and feel. And if you join the army as a 16-year-old, you join with 16-year-olds. When you join the Royal Marines, you join with everybody, regardless. So 23, 24-year-olds, guys who've actually started careers, who've got children, who are married, and you're still a kid when you join, and you're surrounded by these people, and you've just got to get in amongst it and get on with it. And that's what the Royal Marines do so well. Is they don't have these big egos. They're all about that building that culture literally from day one. The minute you walk through that gate, you're starting on a journey together with everyone else that is very unique. It's very culture developing and supportive. Hard, bloody hard, but it's it is about you and the team and building you together regardless of where you've come from and what your background is. No one's given an advantage because of their age and where they've come from, or a disadvantage because I was 16. I just had to step up and get on with it like everybody else. And I sort of really thrived in that challenge, and I was forced to grow up very quick. So I was known in training as the grey man. My surname's Grey, and I was grey by name, grey by nature. I literally just didn't stand out at anything, but I didn't fail anything either. I just did what I needed to do as a 16-year-old boy to keep up and get through. And I was surrounded by some, incredibly supportive people that allowed me to do that. And the people who took me through my Royal Marines career and basic training are still friends to this day. And it's those people and the manner in which the culture of the Royal Marines and that small family culture is that, I suppose, helped me get through that.
Looking at it personally, because you said, of course, they don't give you any advantage to be in 16. How do you think about it personally? Do you think that that's what kept you so focused, was because you were the gray man, but you still, if we're being honest with each other, you had to prove yourself a little bit being younger in with these older guys. Do you think that helped you out by being that young? Because you had mentioned that if you went in the Army, you might be a different person. If you had gone in the Royal Marines as an older guy, do you think it maybe would have turned out different?
Yeah, probably. If I had waited a little bit longer to join the Royal Marines, I perhaps probably wouldn't have. I may have changed my mind, like a lot of my friends and colleagues, my friends from school growing up. Well, my last school, if you like, which was in Warminster in the United Kingdom, which is where my dad was posted at the time where I joined the Marines from. A couple of years later, I'd have probably followed into a completely different career. Maybe I really don't know. If someone was to ask me now, would you recommend joining? And people have actually, they quite often do. And, believe it or not, it was within the last month that I've talked a kid out of joining the Royal Marines at 16. He was talking to me and I was like, look, in hindsight, I would have waited a couple of years till I was 18 before I joined, because it is just so tough for a 16-year-old to get through. And there is an expectation of failure on kids that age. Only recently the Royal Marines have, well, a few years ago now, but they've upped the minimum weight limits on 16-year-olds for joining. So the Army have a standard basic weight that you have to meet before you can join. The Marines have lifted that now because of injuries and the intensity that's on your body in Royal Marine Commando training. So you're more likely to get injured and more likely to fail as a 16-year-old. So if you're going to join at 16, they've put more things in place now to make sure that you've got a better chance. But I think we had 17 juniors, so 17 under 18s join in my troop and training, and only 2 of us actually passed out after the 30 weeks. So that just shows how difficult it is as a 16-year-old to get through the system and training. So it was bloody tough. It was bloody hard. There is an expectation that you probably won't get through first time. And for me, I think that became a driver. Actually, it became a mindset thing for me. I bloody will get through this. And that it was that inner belief and inner strength of not giving up, which went on to support me hugely later on in life, that I was starting to discover back then.
Now, we've had your friend on here before, Tip, and we talked on there about a documentary that was back in the day, which was Behind the Lines. Now, was that around? Were you seeing that? Were you realizing that these guys are doing that? Because we talked about it on his show. If you go to YouTube and watch it, it's wild to watch what they were doing. Was that around for you too to watch, and did that give you another push towards this?
Well, 100% it was. Behind the Lines is legendary. Filmed in 1982, the Royal Marine Mounted Leaders branch, who were, again, a unique set of individuals within the Royal Marines. They played Behind the Lines when I was a 14-year-old in that school, when they came to visit us. That was one of the shows they put on and said, hey, look, this is what we do. I suppose they have to, there can't be any sort of false advertising with something like the Royal Marines. You can't, make it look all glamorous and untrue, and because you'll end up recruiting the wrong kinds of people. So they're honest. They show you the tough side of what they do straight away, and there's nothing tougher than the Royal Marines Mountain Leader course. Doing a survival exercise in winter in Scotland, with no support, and you're just out there in the mountains, in the hills. And so I think, like many of my friends, Behind the Lines was a documentary that definitely inspired, and just that intrigueness of how do you do something like that? It's incredible. I want to learn more, and it certainly sucked me in as well. Yeah.
I bring that up because I've also heard you talk before, and you were talking about when you first joined, approximately your first 4 years, and it really wasn't what you thought it was gonna be. Can we talk about that and how things kind of changed, how you made them shift? Because I want to talk about some people that might have been instrumental in that.
Yeah, so there's a couple of there's a thing I sort of call demarcation lines in life. A lot of people go through these, life-changing moments. A 14-year-old boy, when I met the Royal Marines, was one of those moments where my direction in life changed. I learned something new, and I had a new goal or ambition. The second one was it was about 4 years in. So when you get through this 30 weeks of military training, before you join, you have an ambition and an aspiration of what it's going to be like and who the Royal Marines are. And it doesn't always pan out like that for everyone all of the time. And what you want to do after training is go to a commando unit, a fighting unit, an infantry unit, if you like. My particular troop and training and quite a few troops in training from around that period were sort of chosen to fill gaps in certain areas within the Royal Marines, because some of your listeners might not be aware, the Royal Marines are completely a tight unit that have every single trade incorporated within it. Even though when I joined they were like 7,000 men strong, they have their own drivers, they have their own weapons instructors, they have their own anti-tank defense systems, they have their own air defense systems. We have our own chefs, our own clerks, our own signalers, communications guys, their own mounted leaders. So they can literally deploy for up to 30 days anywhere in the world and be completely self-sufficient without support from outside agencies or bigger organizations like the wider Army, wider Navy and RAF. And it's a unique tool, which is one of the reasons they were chosen for the Falkland Islands operation, etc. Unfortunately, there was a huge lack of drivers and signalers when I passed out of training, so we weren't really given the choice to go and be Royal Marine soldiers straight away, and it was almost dependent on your, what letter your surname began with as to where you were sent after training, and I got what we call pinged, sent to be a driver. And I thought, this is not what I signed up for, but you roll with it because you're only going to do it for a year, they said at the time. We went down to Royal Marines Poole, which is where the drivers' course were being run at the time on the south coast of England. But we also had the 1990-91 Iraq War going on at the time. So many of the Royal Marines who used to run these courses were deployed on that operation. They were supporting the units, that were over in Iraq. So the courses were all held and delayed because they didn't have enough instructors to run them. So for my first literally 4 or 5 months, I was on this camp with no real job, with in a team of about 20 guys that were just literally turning up every day, not doing a great deal. It wasn't a massive, great advertisement for the Royal Marines at the time, and we ended up just drifting through day after day, week after week, with no real purpose, no real training, and just almost sort of looking after ourselves, if that makes sense. And there were various jobs at Poole, one of them being what we call Provi, the security troop, and as a job appeared on security troop or someone got moved away from the unit and drafted somewhere else, then our group started to get smaller and smaller as we started filling gaps in little jobs around the camp, waiting for our courses to start again. And eventually, after about 4 months, I ended up being sent to Provi and joining the security troop. And that's where I met Tip Cullen, who we mentioned earlier. He was a Marine in there already. Yeah, it was a bit of a bizarre start. And then roll forward from that. Eventually, the course started. We did our driver's course, and then the last place in the world, really, at the time I wanted to get sent back to as a driver was Commando Training Centre, Royal Marines. But that's where I got sent to. So literally, I'm not long out of basic training myself. I'm say probably 8-9 months out. I'm still literally not long now into my 18th birthday. I'm an 18-year-old boy. I've been out of training 10 months. I've not really done a great deal to be inspired by the Royal Marines yet. And I'm back at Commando Training Centre driving recruits around. I was one of them 5 minutes ago, and now I'm driving the trucks that take you on exercise, and you're working alongside the training teams, the corporals and the sergeants that took you through training. They're back in another troop now. They're going around again, and they're like, "What are you doing back here?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, tell me about it." And I didn't enjoy that period. I met some fantastic guys. I've got some great friends from that period. I wouldn't say I didn't commit myself to my job, because I always have throughout my entire life. If I've got a role to do, I'll commit to it, and I'll do it to the best of my ability. But I just didn't want to be there. And eventually, after about a year of doing this job, I was clearly quite vocal to my sergeant major at the time, and the senior instructors knew this is not what Baz Gray wanted to do or where he wanted to be.
You were never outspoken as a kid. What brought that out of you in this? Because we started this by saying that you just weren't that kind of person. So what was it about this that brought that out of you?
I think I was just starting to grow up, starting to mature. I was surrounded by people who were gifted at that, Royal Marines, older and more senior Royal Marines. And you start to discover quite early on, you're not going to get anything done, or you're not going to change anything if you just sit in the background. And that's not what Royal Marines are all about. Don't get me wrong, I still wasn't coming out of my shell yet and really discovering who I was going to be at this stage. But again, I think it was that inner determination, that inner understanding that I'm in a position, in a situation that I don't want to be in. And I've got to fight to do something about it. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here, and people will just assume that everything's okay, and I'm content. So again, there I got close to a few senior instructors, because I was good at my job, so I was well respected within the troop. So when I talked to some of my senior instructors or senior sergeants, weren't instructors this stage, they're my colleagues, but senior colleagues, they then helped me through the process of what I needed to do to make change. So again, I wasn't having to be vocal and outspoken. I suppose it was more about taking advice and saying the right things at the right time to the right people, and understanding how to do that, because there was a system in place, a form you could fill in to request a change or a move. And I was ignored for the first few. It'll be all right. You'll do your year. And I said, "Well, I've done my year." He goes, "Oh, well, they'll another 6 months we can look at it." And I'm just like, already things aren't happening in the way that you said they would for me. But eventually, my decision or my request was respected, and I went in front of a board of officers, which was actually quite unusual for a young Marine, and they, I suppose, didn't really understand what I was saying and why I was saying it. And I remember sitting in front of the colonel, the regimental sergeant major, my troop commander at the time in the motor transport department, and a few others. I don't really know who was in the room. And they were asking me all these questions about why I'm not content, why I don't want to do what I'm doing, why I want to move on. And I'm trying to answer these questions as best I can, without being disrespectful. But, I didn't ask to do this. I didn't join to do this. This is not my choice, and the Royal Marines is behind the lines. It's the mountain leaders. It's the Commando units. It's 4-2, 4-5. It's the guys in Iraq. That's where I wanted to be. And eventually, my MTO, the troop boss, just stepped up and said, what is going on here? This is crazy. This is a young guy, just wants to be a Marine. He wants to be out there in the Commando units. Why are we stopping him? And the colonel just went, "I agree. Marine Grey, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, what can I do? What are my options?" And there were a couple of courses coming up within that unit, because a lot of the training courses from a lot of the specializations within the Royal Marines are all run at Commando Training Centre as well. It's not just recruit training, it's the officers, it's anti-tank courses, it's mortar courses, and it's mountain leaders now. It wasn't then, but it is now. And they said, right, there's an anti-tank course coming up and there's a mortars course coming up. The courses are about 8 weeks long. Do you fancy doing that? And I said, yeah, absolutely, because it's a fighting course, and it would get me into a commando unit. And they said which one. I didn't really know a great deal between any of them. I just said the first thing that came into my head, and I said anti-tanks, please. And literally 3 weeks later, I was on an anti-tanks course, which I passed, which I enjoyed, and then I was in 40 Commando, literally as they were about to deploy to West Belfast in Northern Ireland before the ceasefire. And support company, who anti-tanks belonged to, and actually ended up being disbanded because there was no role for anti-tank troop, and we were all put into what we call GRAV troops, GD Marine Commando troops, which is where I wanted to be all along. And I ended up in Bravo Company as a Marine on the streets of West Belfast, literally within weeks of joining 40 Commando. And then I was just like that. Yeah, where's this been? This is absolutely brilliant. And I absolutely loved that job, and just being in amongst what I joined the Royal Marines to do on my first operational tour, as a young kid. And it was just so exciting and adventurous. And we came back from that incredible tour in 40 Commando, and I'd met a girl. I'd met my sort of wife to be at the time, who was a naval nurse, and she was posted down to Plymouth, and 40 Commando was in Taunton. And we came back. I did my first cold weather warfare course, where I met the Royal Marine Mountain Leaders branch. We were doing exciting exercises all over the world. It was a superb place to be, and I was really, really happy for the first time in my career. But I also had this relationship going on down in Plymouth, and Taunton to Plymouth is quite a long trek for a young lad. And if you weren't married in the day, you didn't get any money or financial support to help you with travel to work. And this was like an hour and a half commute every day. I could live on camp, but I also wanted to see my sort of girlfriend at the time every day. And an opportunity came up for a move, if you like, to 4-2 Commando in Plymouth in anti-tanks. Exactly the same job in anti-tanks with the same type of people, but just in a different unit down in Plymouth, which meant it would have been closer to home. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take this opportunity and get drafted down to 4-2. I've been in 40 Commando for a couple of years now. It would have been time to move on soon enough. And I moved down to Plymouth, and it was one of the worst decisions of my life, still to this day, ever. It was unbelievable. It was like walking into a different military organization altogether. 4-2 Commando at the time weren't really going anywhere. They weren't doing a great deal. The personalities, I'll never mention any names and something like this, but a lot of the personalities at the time in there weren't interested. There was no snazzy exercises or deployments going on. People there just seemed to be no morale. It was like chalk and cheese from where I'd just come from. And I hated it. I just hated it. And I'd been in like 4.5 years, and I'm like, I've had this little inkling now as to what the Royal Marines are all about, and it's been taken away from me again. And I'm just with these bunch of people that just don't seem to care. And I'm like, how can anti-tank troops 4-2 Commando be so different to the personalities and people in 40 Commando? It just blew me away. And after a while, I just thought, you know what, sod this. I'm going to leave. I actually decided to leave the Royal Marines after 4.5 years and just say, I don't want to do this. It's just not what I thought it was going to be. And I filled in my paperwork, and it got accepted. They were quite disappointed, some people, but others didn't care, which sort of made my point. And a job came up. We have these things called orders, which go on the wall every day. You've got to read the orders, just to make sure you know what time to turn up the next day and what to wear and what kit and what you're going to do, which at the time was nothing. And on there was a job advertising for a storeman in the company. So the guys who supply you all of the kit and equipment and look after all the stores in the background. And I said, you know what, I need to get out of this troop. I'm going to put in for that. And I put in for the job in the store, And reluctantly they let me go, but because I had my notice in and was wanting to leave the Royal Marines, then I was no use to them. There's no point them investing their time in me anymore, not that they did anyway, which is why I was moving. And I ended up as a storeman in 40 Commando, which was sort of putting myself deliberately in a position that I didn't want to be in, but I just needed to get out of what I was doing again.
This is what's so interesting about your career to me. This is where you
Yeah.
meet Pat O'Flynn.
That's right. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and it's so crazy to me about your career when you hit these points. You miss the first desert war that's going on.
Yeah.
But then you go to Northern Ireland, and I would like to ask about Northern Ireland, but I want to talk about this for just a minute. You get ready to get out. Then you go, and someone else comes in front of you. I want to know, with this guy, Pat O'Flynn, how much did he have to do with the trajectory of your career? How much did he have to do with you turning the corner on the Royal Marines?
Everything. Absolutely everything. I started to see a part of the Royal Marines that I still hadn't been introduced to yet. I started to see things that no one had shown me and I hadn't seen or witnessed before. I knew these guys existed. I wasn't that naive to know that, mountain leaders and reconnaissance troop, was what wasn't there. But to me, where I was sat, they were like the best, the fittest, the most professional soldiers in the Marines, and they were untouchable to me at this time. And I just looked at them in awe, as I would love to do something like that, but that's way beyond me and my capabilities. That's the way my head worked at the time. And Pat, so when you reach the rank of colour sergeant, just before sergeant major, you end up doing jobs and roles quite often called TQ, technical quartermasters, and sort of logistics jobs. I suppose it gives you a bit of knowledge and advice and help and support to become a sergeant major later. And Pat was a Royal Marine mountain leader. He'd done all of the jobs, 4-5 Commando. He was a bit of a legend in quite a few people's eyes at the time. And he was my colour sergeant in the store. So the things I could learn from him and appreciate, and the stories he could tell me about what you can do in the Royal Marines, I'd never heard of. And this goes straight back to the behind the line stuff, the video. He was a Royal Marine mountain leader. He'd done that course. And you're like, I've never really met anyone properly that had done that course. And Tip Cullen, who we'll end up keep bouncing back to, was also an inspiration at this same stage, because he'd gone on and done this course. He came down from 4-5 Commando in Scotland to do his corporal's course, to go on to the mountain leader course. So I was aware of that, and Tip had, although he was a much more senior and older Marine than me at the time, I still remembered and kept in touch with him, and knew he'd gone down that route as well, and he was a friend in the background. Now, support company also houses recce troop. So within support company, you've got the assault engineers, you've got anti-tanks, you've got mortars, and you have recce troop. So just down the corridor from me in the store were the recce troop guys. And when you're in the store, you get access to everybody. You have the ability to work with and understand and learn about everybody, because you're supporting all of them, not just one part of them. And I started to see and get a look and feel for the Royal Marines in a way that I'd never had done before. And understanding Pat and talking to Pat and trying to get an idea of what it took to get into a group of guys like that, he was just like that. Well, you'll never know if you don't give it a go. But also there's this amazing exercise called Exercise Ice Flip, which takes you to Switzerland, takes the mountain leaders to Switzerland for 4 weeks every year, where the mountain leaders do their own internal intense training. So the better mountaineers, they can become the better instructors they can become, when they come back to teach the regular Royal Marines. They always need to have logistic support staff to run those exercises. So basically people who wash the pots and help the chefs cook the food and bits and pieces. But it's in Switzerland for a month with the mountain leaders. And Pat managed to get me a place as one of the support team for an exercise ice flip. And so 1 minute I'm sitting in this horrible anti-tank shed with these people who just really weren't interested. Next minute, I'm in the store. I've met Pat O'Flynn, and I'm now in Switzerland on an exercise with the Royal Marine Mountain Leaders Brand. I wasn't doing the mountain leaders stuff, but just to be involved in that organisation, treat like an adult, treat like a grown up. Wasn't belittled in any way or had fingers pointed at me because I'm peeling spuds and washing pots. They just saw that as a vital role to allow them to be able to do their job, and it was just that grown up, mature attitude that I witnessed from that organisation, which again gave me a little lift. And when I came back from that exercise, I basically said to Pat, "There's a recce troop selection process coming up. Do you think I can go on it?" And they knew my notice was in, so they shouldn't have let me. But I spoke to my OC at the time, who was a guy called David Capewell, who went on to become a 3-star general, who again is still a friend today and actually helping me today with my expeditions, which is incredibly bizarre. And he said, "Right, okay, if you pass the selection, I'll let you go on it. If you pass it, then I will, I'll sort of endorse your recommendation to stay in and allow you to go. But it's up to you now. You've got to get on the selection and pass it." So there were 17 people, I believe, 17 or 8 people joined or applied, the fittest, most motivated, strongest Marines in the unit for 5 places. And the 5 selected at the end of this really, really tough week were going to join Recce Troop immediately. They were going to be in, and I just remember turning up day 1, week 1 on this selection, and we just got thrashed for a week. It was sleep deprivation. It was physically challenging. It was about being a good Marine, about being a good navigator, showing determination in a way that I'd never ever had to do it before. And it was at the time, it was the toughest thing I'd done by far. It was tougher than anything I'd done in basic training, which is hard enough. And at the end of it, we just didn't know. We had no idea. And it's just the classic where you sat in a room waiting for the results. You lot go that way, you lot go that way. And you still literally don't know whether you're in the pass or fail room. And then someone came in our room and said, "Congratulations, you've been selected to join Royal Marine Recce Troop." And I was absolutely blown away. Not only that, I actually came top of the selection. And that moment in time when I discovered that was the single most important point in my life that gave me the determination. And that's when I massively turned a corner when it came to confidence, attitude, belief in myself, and just told myself for the first time in my life, "You've got this. You are as good as you want to be. You're as confident and as good as any of these guys to your left and right." And it was for the first time in my life I stopped looking up at people as as something to aspire to, and put myself alongside them as someone that deserved to be there because he was good enough to be there. From that day, I got promoted to Lance Corporal straight away. I was put into a team second in command position straight away, and I was up and running. And I literally never looked back from that moment, and then went on to have this incredible career from that point forward.
In talking about that, and you say that was the single most important moment, we know how it affected you in your military career. How did it affect you in every other aspect of your life? Dealing with girlfriends, wives, family, friends on the outside. Did it change anything for that?
Yeah, I think I became literally a completely different character overnight. I think I developed a swagger. I was, all of my reports up to that point was saying, Marine Grey, doesn't show any sort of leadership potential. He's quite quiet and outspoken. I never had a report like that ever again. It was always about, this guy's now ready to promote now. He's showing all the skills and accolades of of the leadership that require at this level, and getting the grades required to go onto the promotion courses were all starting to come in now. And, just being in a pub, having a drink with the lads, I would start to join in with people more. Start to become the life and soul, the person that people wanted to be around, as opposed to me wanting to fit into groups and go and do these things. I was actually feeling so much more confident in every aspect of life, because I was doing this incredibly amazing job, which just gives you an inner belief and an inner confidence in all aspects of who you are and what you do across everything. Like you say, family, friends, everything. I would say my sort of girlfriend, wife to be at the time, would have noticed a huge change in me. And I think for the better with everybody. My family noticed when I came home. I was a completely different person. My brother, especially my older brother, went, "Wow, where did this guy come from?" I did literally change overnight, and just became this more confident, more self-assured, more knowledgeable person as to who I wanted to be. And it was the person I always wanted to be. I just didn't know how to weave my way through into finding it. It just took 4.5, 5 years, really.
One, you say that was the person that you always wanted to be. Do you think you were ever scared to be that person, or scared to do what it took to be that person? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question would be, we talked about you going to Northern Ireland. Before you did any of this, before you changed and had this swagger, can you compare that Boz in Northern Ireland, a new guy into combat, to this guy that just got out of this course?
Yeah, definitely. In the fact that on the streets of Northern Ireland, again, I was a follower. I was a young Marine in a team, listening to people, having to tell me what to do every day. I would never even have considered trying. I was a good professional Marine. I did my job well, and when things went wrong, I would react in the way they needed me to react. I would do my job in the way they needed me to do my job. But I wasn't a decision maker. I wasn't the person that made things happen. I wasn't the natural leader in the team, and I would just again be a quiet Marine in the background, quietly going about my business, as a young kid still. Roll forward with the attitude of putting me on those streets as a recruit Marine. A few years later, I would want to be the team commander. I want to be the guy in charge, running the section, running the patrol. I've got the confidence now to know that I can make decisions as well as anybody in my peer group. And, I don't want to be a Marine in the team anymore. I want to be the team commander. That's the difference it gave me. And, to answer the first part of your question, definitely there was a fear of being successful. There was a massive fear of failure. I think I've had that all my life, which gives me that inner drive to actually prepare well for things now these days. I put so much time and effort into preparing for my expeditions and making sure that I'm the best version of myself when I start any project, because I do have that, that fear of failure and fear of not achieving. And that used to hold me back to the point where I just wouldn't even suggest to myself going for it. And it took so long to build up the courage. It wasn't just a case of, can I go and do record tube selection? It took me literally 6 months to build up the courage just to ask the question, do you think I'm capable? When deep down I was always capable. I just didn't have the inner belief or inner confidence. And that's what changed in my mind. I started to get the confidence to deal with fear and deal with the fact that it might not work out for you, but hey, give it a go. Because you just don't know, and life is just gonna be full of regrets if you just keep living with that attitude of, I might fail it, I might not be good enough for this, so therefore I'm just not going to bother giving it a go. That's what changed, and I would have the strength, regardless of what I thought the outcome might be, to go for it anyway.
You talk about failure, though, and it's very interesting how you speak about failure. When you talk about failure, you don't talk about failing the actual objective, failing the actual problem that's been set out in front of you. You think a big reason that people worry about failure is not because they won't do that. It's because of what everyone will talk about around them, what everyone will spread and say, this person did this, or why did they try that, or anything like that. That's an interesting look at failure of why people do, because they're more worried about people than they are about the actual problem. Can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah, it's about perception, isn't it? And I sort of deal with and sort of work in the leadership sector now, with all of the things I've done from expeditions and military career, etc. My experiences, that sort of pays my bills these days, when, helping, civilian corporate companies with, with leadership issues and bits and pieces like that. And peer perception and the perception of others is a big part in which you've got to get your head round early, and because it forces you to make decisions that you shouldn't be making. It is that worry about what people will think of you. And remember, I mean, the Royal Marines are an elite, extremely professional, very, very proud group of people, and they don't ever like to be seen in a negative light. So sometimes that will hold them back on taking challenges, because they always want to be extremely successful at everything they do. And if there's a risk that they might not be, then the peer perception is that you're not as good a Marine as you think you are, or you're not as good a Marine as you think. So you can end up not taking risks. So it is a very elite side of what failure is, and to some people, they'll say, just getting through the gate to even have, even to have a go at being a Royal Marine Commandos is a success to most people. That is, so far out of reach from so many people. So, sometimes you have to remember and tell yourself what you've achieved to get where you've got. But when you're in the moment, in the time as a young kid in this really elite professional environment, your head just doesn't work like that, and you won't take the risks in which you should take to have the best career and be the best version of yourself. And it's a common problem I see across society all the time now, and I deal with it regularly. It's just giving people that inner belief and that inner confidence to just give it a go. Otherwise, you're just gonna live life with regrets.
Let's talk about the difference between inner confidence and cockiness, because there's a huge difference, and I think that line gets blurred tremendously especially in the areas that you lived your life in: military, first responders, adventurers, explorers. That line can blur a lot. Can we talk a little bit about that?
It can, and you do see it a lot. You can also throw in the word complacency as well. Cocky people get complacent, they make mistakes, and they don't prepare properly. There's a big difference between someone who's determined and has a slight fear of failure, which you'll go down one way, you'll force yourself to prepare even more, and you'll double up and double down on everything that you do to make sure that when you turn up on day one, you are going to be successful. And then there's I've got this, I'll be all right, of course I can do this, why can't I've got all this experience, I'm just going to rock up and I'll get through this, and after a while, good leaders and good people in these environments can see straight through who's cocky and who's got a proper inner belief and confidence in what they do, just in the way they hold themselves, the way they speak, their attitudes, and the type of people they are. And I help people look for that now, because I've been through it myself and I've witnessed it so many times. I've had young Marines later on in my career come on selection courses like me when they were 17, 18 year old, or they're a little bit older, in their early 20s, coming onto recce selection, when I'm now the instructor running the course, and I'm going, you are one of the fittest, strongest, most motivated Marines I've ever met, but you ain't coming on this course because you're cocky, because I don't like your attitude, and you're not going to fit in with the team, because you've turned up here with this attitude that you're already good enough to do this job, and you're already better than everyone that's doing it already, and you are going to become an individual within a team where we can't have individuals. So you need to go away and have a look at your attitude. I don't care how fit and strong you are. I don't care how good your map reading skills are or your soldiering skills. You will not blend into this environment, into this team, because we're looking for different people. So it does stand out after a while when you're a good leader and you're looking for things like that. And there's a big difference between being a little bit fearful, a little bit cautious, and being cocky. And if you know what you're looking for, it's very easy to spot as well.
Let's come back to that in a minute, but let me ask you. You can prepare all you want. It's a known fact that sometimes Murphy's Law pops up and you will fail just out of failure.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that you can prepare and prepare and prepare and work every angle that you possibly can, and failure will still come from that? So the first part of that would be, how do you work through that? You as yourself, how do you teach people to work through that? And number two to that is, how do you prepare for failure?
Yeah, so for me, it's about dealing with the everyday, and just you've got to accept, I think, very early on in life, that failure is part of the journey that you're going to have between, your birthbed and your deathbed. It's going to happen. It doesn't matter how good you are or how successful you become, how much money you've got, whether you became the most senior general or the biggest CEO of the biggest business in the world. Your life is going to be littered with failure regardless, and there's nothing you can do about that. If you can accept that, then you know you're going to hit these moments in life which generally come as a surprise, and quite often actually come on the back of you putting the most preparation in. And you'll see a lot of the biggest CEOs, on globally, these big financial companies, have gone from almost making it back to absolutely nothing, literally overnight, and going, wow, I had everything, now I've got nothing, and drawing a line under it, building back up again. Those are sort of life's winners, aren't they? The people who dwell on it, can't deal with it, and spend too long moping about it, are the people who won't have the biggest success. You've got to learn early that when something goes wrong and doesn't go your way, the sooner you can draw a line under it, the better. The sooner you can start bouncing forward and start changing the questions and changing the dynamic of the situation you're in, then the sooner things will start, becoming right again. And it's a very difficult thing to do when you're young and inexperienced, because again, it's that peer group pressure. It's the way you view people looking at you. But as you get a bit older and a bit more experienced and a bit more knowledgeable, and if your mindset is the right one and you're asking the right questions, then you start to learn to deal with it in a much better way. And it almost becomes part of the planning for me now. The what ifs are all in there now. So by asking the questions and planning the failure before the failure happens, clearly you're hoping it doesn't happen, but you go through the journey in your mind. What if this doesn't quite work out? What am I going to do then? You've worked through it. You've asked the questions. So when it does happen, it's not a complete shock or surprise, but you've already got a plan in place, and you're not trying to think on your feet and panic and get yourself through that plan, or decide which way life's going to go, and you're just going to, oh, that's it. It's all over. It didn't work out. My future's ruined. You can't ever go there and be that person, when these life things happen. And the first time I had to deal with this properly was, again, roll forward again from Recce Troop. This is generally where we find the Royal Marine Mountain leaders. They come from Recce Troop generally. They're the fittest, strongest guys. The mountain leader course is 8 months long. It's again tougher than basic training. It's tougher than anything I've ever done before. I applied for my selection to do the mountain leader course, passed it, which meant I had to go on a leadership course, my corporal's course, an 8-week course at Commando Training Centre, passed that, and then was loaded onto the course. 8-month course, doing very, very well. I was coping with the exercise. It was all about rock climbing and dealing with heights and, cliff assault techniques in the early days, and just knowing that you can deal with exposure and all of the new tools that Royal Marine Mountain leaders have to have up in the mountains and hanging off cliffs and things like that, and learning to play with ropes, stuff that I thrived on and loved. And they've got this little traditional thing that they do in Cornwall. It's called the Land's End long jump. All the old boys in their hobnail boots, the very first MLs, used to run along and bounce from rock to rock. No ropes, no safety. Whereas traditionally on our course, we all go down and do this Land's End long jump, but with ropes and harnesses on and all this sort of stuff. And no one ever bottles it or doesn't do it. But it has over the years caused a few injuries. And I did my jump, totally fine, landed, walked off. 5 minutes later, I literally collapsed in the most pain I've ever felt in my life ever. And I don't really know what happened or how it happened, because I walked off. But the calcaneum, which is literally the back of my heel, had been fractured in my landing. So the impact on the back of my foot when it had hit the rock had obviously shattered my heel bone. And because there's not a great deal of circulation there, it takes a bit of time for the body to work out what's happened to it. For the senses to tell me something's broken. And that's why it took 4 or 5 minutes, and I just hit the ground. I couldn't put my foot on the floor. This thing I'd spent so much time building up to do. I was on an exercise in Norway before this with Recce Troop, really, really tough winter, doing, really the toughest exercises I've ever done, yet I was still getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing extra training, doing extra running, extra circuits before my day in Recce Troop started, because I was so determined to be, to do well on this course and make sure I was just the best physical specimen I could be. And now, one course a year, I can't even stand up, let alone carry on this course, and it's so I'm a month in and I have to come off and get sent back to my unit, and that was tough. That was, the lowest moment I think I'd experienced up to that point in my life, because things were starting to turn and go really well for me and I was loving it. And then boom, that's not happening anymore. You've got a broken foot. And it was 6 months before I could actually start running again from that injury of just doing a little traditional jump on the cliffs. So that was my first real experience of dealing with proper failure. And, it hit me really hard.
I think that the long jump that you're talking about was in Behind the Lines. I think they show that. Yeah, I think they show that in like episode 1. They show that when that happens to you, you say it's the biggest point of failure that you'd had so far in life. Is there also a fear that all of this might go away? You've worked so hard to get where you're at, right? You've done all these things. You've excelled in everything you're doing. But if something's really wrong with you and they can't fix it or you can't get past it, this all might go away. After you've built this person up, this new person that you said came to you overnight, do you worry that that person goes back into the shadows and the old Boz comes out?
Oh, I was in such a low place, because when you go on courses like this, remember although I was in Recce Troop, I still had a specialist qualification, which was anti-tanks. But that was the reason I ended up going down this road. But that was still my job in the Royal Marines, because Recce Troop wasn't a specialisation at the time. It was just something you were allowed to go and do. So in order for me to lose the anti-tank tag, I had to become a mountain leader tag. Then that one disappears. So because I was unsuccessful on the course, well, what that meant was, I've left Recce Troop now to do the course. This means I go back to anti-tanks. So it's like a double whammy, double blow. And I'm going, because you're drafted, you're sent to the mountain leader course. You don't go back to Recce Troop from there. You go back to what your job actually is, and I was absolutely devastated at the time. It just hit me so hard. The instructors are going, well, this was on a Friday I did this. They said, we'll keep you here for the weekend. We'll treat it, we'll ice it, we'll get it x-rayed, and we'll just see how you are on Monday morning. That was one of the worst weekends of my life, because I knew, like Sunday, I couldn't even put my foot on the floor. I'm like, nothing's happening on Monday. I'm being what we call RTU'd, returned to unit. Just that weekend, think that, you're a roughy tufty Royal Marine Commando, but I think there were probably a few tears, in a dark corner somewhere as well. That, exactly as you said, this is all over for me. I'm gonna go back to anti-tank troop, and the opportunity to get into Recce Troop isn't going to be for a long time now, because I can't even run or stand up. And yeah, I was absolutely demoralised. But what brought me around? The instructors, the Royal Marine Mountain Leaders branch, the people that were surrounding me. There was a guy called Colin Hearn who was running the course, still a friend of mine now. He said, look, don't worry, this doesn't have to be the end. You can come back on next year's course. I'm like, yeah, but that's a year away. I've got to go back to anti-tanks. And he says, why do you have to go back to anti-tanks? This was on the Monday. And I said, because that's my RTU tag. That's where I have to go. He says, no. He said, we like you. You were doing really well on the course. We want you to come back on the course. So it's in our interest to keep you within our fold. And so we had an organisation at the time called the Brigade Patrol Troop, which was based in Stonehouse Barracks here in Plymouth, which was full of MLs and recce guys. It's like the brigade level recce force, so it's a step up from Commando unit recce. It's the most senior reconnaissance troop in the Royal Marines at the time. And basically what they did was they sent me there. They sent me amongst the Royal Marine Mountain leaders who were serving, who were training and doing their jobs around the Royal Marines. And they allowed me to sit there and recover and recuperate and get fit and strong again amongst people who had already done this course. And that was unbelievable. That was someone buying into me, the person, into Baz Gray, to say, we want you to do this course because we like what we've seen, we like who you are, and we're going to keep you with us within this team if you're happy to stay with us and wait and recover and come back next year and have another go. And I just went, no, all the stars had aligned all of a sudden. So that weekend of just self-doubt and pity and moaning and feeling sorry for myself was literally transformed in a moment when I was told, oh, no, we're not getting rid of you. We're going to fix you and bring you back. Was absolutely incredible, and again, it's another one of those moments I'll never forget.
Do you ever sit back and think about your career as a whole and look at these trigger points all through your career that you were almost about to get out? Then you come across Pat O'Flynn. You're at the Mountain Leaders course and you could have to go back to that and not come back for a year. Someone steps in and says, we're going to keep you around. Yeah. Do you ever just go, man, I must have fallen under a lucky star, must have been blessed, whatever it is that you believe in? Do you feel that had something to do with how far you went in your career?
I think it's just I met good people at the right time who give a shit about who you are as a person. And that's what's taught me more about leadership than anything else, is these little moments. It's how I had an expectation of how it was going to be handled, and I was blown away by a completely different way in which it was handled by people who just cared, who are tough as old boots, who are absolutely the best, most professional Marines that you look up to and admire, looking at you and saying, I'm going to look after you because you're exactly what we need in these organizations. It was leadership of the highest quality that I experienced on many, many occasions that helped me become the same or very similar person with the same traits as I grew up and got older. And I had the ability when I got older and in the more senior leadership positions to look back on those moments and say there's a right and a wrong way to deal with people, and I've witnessed some of the most powerful moments in my own personal life when I thought it was all over and people were just going to cast me aside. I actually got the opposite. Therefore, I know the power of decisions I will make in the future, that what it will have on others that need that level of support as well. Those moments I reflect on as examples of how to get it right, of how to do leadership properly.
All right, let's step through your career a little bit. I don't want to go deep into your combat. We need to talk about it because I think it crafted who you were. But main things that we talk about: Northern Ireland, Kosovo, Afghanistan. I want to use Northern Ireland and Afghanistan because I'm guessing Afghanistan is at the tail end of your career.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's take that recruit, that young Marine, Northern Ireland, compared to the Afghanistan Baz Gray.
Yeah.
How different a person are you?
Completely now, because by this time when I'm going on the next operational tours, I am a trained, badged, working Royal Marine mountain leader within the Royal Marines. So when we went to Kosovo initially, which I still to this day look upon as the most professional, best 7 months of my career, where I did more soldiering, proper soldiering across all aspects of soldiering, from urban to rural to following people around in vehicles. It just had everything to because I was a trained sniper as well at the time, which is one of the highlights of my career is passing the Royal Marine Snipers course, which is one of the toughest on the planet. And being a sniper in Kosovo and using those skills and it was just incredible. And I was with Tommy. That's when we were there with Tip, where we were Team 2IC and IC for the first time working together. So this legend, I'm now his second in command in his team. And you're going out to Afghanistan and places like this now as someone who's in charge of someone else, someone who has to make decisions on the ground about where you go, what you do, and understanding the power that your decisions can result in life or death, literally. If you get it wrong or make the wrong call or turn down the wrong street, anything can happen, which I used to thrive on and love. and it was all about my lads and my people and the guys around me, and doing the best job we possibly could for the reasons we're out there. And it was two completely different people and individuals, and I would love to have had that strength of character and that level of confidence on the streets of Northern Ireland as an 18-year-old. I would have viewed that whole tour completely differently, but I didn't, and it just took a bit of time to get there. But yeah, it's chalk and cheese.
When you go through all these different deployments, you do all of these combat rotations, and you say just now that you're at a point where there's leadership, and if you make the wrong decision, things happen. When was the first time in combat that you felt things are real? Something that you had never thought of before, because it happens to everyone, whether law enforcement, military, whatever. That happens where you see something that you were like, I would have never in a million years thought about that. When does it become real and we're playing for keeps now?
It was probably the insertion into the Al-Faw Peninsula in Iraq, when we lost the entire headquarters on the insertion when the helicopter went down. Tip was with us at the time. That was the real, this is unbelievable moment. This is real. We're in the desert of Kuwait. 40 Commando have deployed now from ship. They're already fighting on the ground. We're going in as a blocking force. For me, I'm part of a reconnaissance screen with the Brigade Patrol Troop and 4-2 Recce Troop. And, we're inserting to do a job to protect our colleagues on the ground. And then as we're inserting, we do our rehearsals the night before. We're flying in, and we all know what helicopter we're on. We all know what job we've got. We spent 4 months in the desert building models and doing research and going through all the intelligence we can possibly go through to know exactly what we're likely to expect, and walking and talking through it on the ranges every day. And then literally on the actual insertion, one of the helicopters goes down, and the entire headquarters is on that helicopter. The OC, the sergeant major, the comms colour sergeant, all your friends, all your colleagues, eight men, and the whole crew of the aircraft gone. We haven't even landed in the op yet. We haven't even just stepped foot off the ground, on the first aggressive post. And that was a very, very difficult night, for lots of different reasons, for lots of people. It's the first time we'd experienced mass casualties on an operational deployment, in that way. And when we landed, I didn't actually know when we were running back off the helicopter that we were back where we started. They actually turned the entire helicopter fleet round back to where we were because of what had happened, because they didn't understand the incident. There was a lot of confusion around, but we still thought we were landing where we were planned to landing, on the Al-Faw Peninsula. And then all of a sudden, we're being called over by people, and it was clear we were back where we started. While investigations then started, and information slowly started to come through, there was confusion with the nominal and who was on the aircraft, because after the rehearsals the night before, they changed bodies around from one aircraft to another, but they didn't update the paperwork. So we're starting to get information now from the nominal role as to who was on the helicopter, and it was all the wrong people. So Tip was on the nominal of the aircraft that had gone down. And so as far as I was concerned, my sort of best mate, Tip, who was on that aircraft, apparently, was no longer. And I remember standing in a desert thinking about Jules, his wife, thinking about Thomas and Kieran and Natalie, all of their kids, and going, this is going to be horrific. They're such a close family. He's a proper family man. I got all these thoughts going through my head, and the guy walks over, and I'm like, you're dead. What are you doing here? Am I seeing ghosts now? And the confusion of war was, is a real thing, of people just not knowing what's going on. And it takes time to get the real information. Meanwhile, you're still in that, because you're prepping so well. You're still in that war fighting mindset that we got lads on the ground. We're supposed to be on the ground protecting them now. We don't know whether or not a big invasion force is now moving down towards the Al-Faw, to support their colleagues down there. We didn't have this knowledge in terms, which is why, 4-2 needed to be there as a blocking screen, because the Al-Faw Peninsula was just such an important strategic target to control. So we're like, we need to go. Yes, this has happened, but there's guys are on the ground. We've got a role to support them. And it doesn't matter what we said or do, the Americans just grounded their entire aircraft fleet. So we had to wait for the British RAF and the CH-47s to arrive the following morning to then insert us again. And now we're on much bigger aircraft, so the teams are all over the place, which means the landing points are all over the place. The vehicles that were supposed to meet us didn't arrive. We ended up having to eventually get in and walk for miles and miles and miles instead of having our vehicles to take us there. And the whole thing just went to pot, and it was just crazy. And it took days and days to really sort itself out. So all of that planning, we have a phrase that says, planning will never will never survive first contact, and that first contact was the helicopter going down, and the whole 4-month plan went out the window. It became completely irrelevant, and we would just literally just get in there and sort it out, which is what we did. And it was just so random and bizarre, but that was the first real experience of this is real shit.
That's quite a bit into your career when that finally happens, which is amazing to me to hear you say, that it happened then. Can we fast forward to Afghanistan a little bit? And I would think, being a mountain leader, you became, like the chief instructor for it. Like, this was what you were made to do. When you get to Afghanistan, is that the most that you see this training has come and helped you be the soldier you are? Like, that's the place that you use this the most?
Yeah, definitely. Because all the tours I did, I never actually did a tour as a rifleman. So I did the troop sergeant roles as a mountain leader and all that sort of stuff. But all of my operational stuff was done in the reconnaissance environment. So you're always frontline troops. You're always out in front. Looking for information. Eyes and ears of the brigade commander. That sort of thing. So it's a different experience. A lot of the guys who had the boots on the ground and the big patrol fighting stuff. So and depending what tour you went on, dependent on how much of the fighting, if you like, on the ground that you got involved in. And I didn't do a lot of that side of stuff. A lot of the stuff was very edgy, in that you are in a vehicle and going into an area for the first time and not knowing. So there's a lot of, when you're there as the fighting troops on the ground, yes, there is still an element of not knowing, but the reconnaissance and the intelligence forces have put so much time and effort in that you've got a very good understanding of what to expect. That you're going to hit the ground running, you're going to start fighting, and you're going on this operation or whatever. Quite often in the recce reconnaissance world, you don't know what's to come. So you've always got that fear factor, always got that unknown, you're always on edge, and you're always worried about what's going to happen. And the Royal Marine mounted leaders got absolutely annihilated through the Afghanistan campaigns. At one point, they were the highest ratio of anybody in the armed forces in Afghanistan that were the most likely to be killed or blown up. I think the ratio may have ended up being like 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 at one point, chance of being blown up if you're a Royal Marine mounted leader. And one of the reasons for that is, if you are an officer commanding or going into somewhere for the first time, if you've got Royal Marine mounted leaders within your organisation, you're going to use them to lead your men into whatever scenario you're going into. And quite often it's first impact where you have the most injuries, when an ambush opens up, or you're surprised. Quite often it takes a bit of time to get a grip on the situation, and up until that point, in the first instances, you're always going to generally lose a couple of people, potentially. And quite often that was the mounted leaders. Or there's been a hidden bomb, which a huge amount of the problems were the hidden IEDs, hidden explosives, buried underneath the ground on likely walking routes, likely driving routes, and we lost a lot of guys that way. I've got 2 good friends who are triple amputees. I've got many friends who are double amputees, and even more who are single amputees. And we lost a lot of people in that way, in those fighting. But I wasn't involved in any of those really serious incidences. And because the role I had and the manner in which I went about my operational careers on the tours I did, saw me sort of out front doing reconnaissance, recce work to feed information into a lot of the fighting stuff. So it was, they were quite unique and different tools for me, working as a sniper up on the mountains around Bagram Air Base, observing, movement towards big targets and things. It was unique and different, but fascinating all the same.
Do you look at your career at all, and now as you're in combat, you're older, you're more mature, you, like we've said a couple times, you have changed into a completely different person. Mm-hmm. Do you know the whole time this was what you were meant to do? And then on top of that, I want to know, once you start going into these combat deployments, once you start seeing this stuff happen, once you start letting it be real for you, how is your mental health? I know you do a lot of work for post-traumatic stress with guys that are dealing with it now. How's your mental faculties? How's your mental health while you're moving through this?
Yeah, I don't think you can have a career like the one we've had, or a lot of my peers have had, and not be affected by it. I've certainly, I feel I've dealt with it quite well, considering what I've experienced and what I've seen in relation to some of my colleagues and friends who've had similar experiences. They've suffered a lot more. I think I've handled it quite well, but certainly definitely affected. It has changed my personality. I do have unexplainable down days and moments in life that sometimes can last a week or two, where you just can't pick yourself up, where you're sort of just fatigued and lethargic and depressed and stuff like that. I have had the odd unexplained panic attack sitting in a pub every now and then, where I've just had to get the hell out of there, and I've just not had a clue what's been going on in my head. And I think they're almost a natural consequence of the experiences that that you go through, and you need to get help and talk about this and discuss this, which I was always more than happy to do. It's the people who don't have those conversations and accept what's happening to them and try to learn about it that end up going down a different road. But it's a very, very real thing. And like I say, yeah, there's a lot of it out there, and and I'm always doing a charity event here or a fundraiser there, or supporting in any way I can since my career ended, to raise funds, to raise awareness. I'm trustee of charities that support veterans and armed forces. It's a big part of my life. It's a huge part of my life, and a lot of that was from doing, again, the sergeant major and regimental sergeant major roles, where you do become dad. Your discipline, your welfare, but you're the experienced hand and you're the experienced voice in the unit at the end of your career that ends up dealing with families and dealing with wives and children, when colleagues don't come back. And when you've lived through that and experienced that and had to support people through, the worst and most tragic of times, it starts to develop a character within you that it's something you're either good at and you can help and support people because of your experience, or some people just avoid it and can't go down that way at all. I've discovered I'm a character that, through my experience, can help, does help, and can help people get through these traumatic scenarios and situations which you have to do. You just got to keep talking and supporting and making sure you're there for people if they need you to be.
Let's move forward to 2013. This is where this doesn't have anything to do with military combat, but you start doing some really crazy stuff. It's unbelievable when you start reading into this. Let's talk 2013. It's Shackleton's rescue. You're going to, I guess, reattempt it or attempt to recreate it. Let me just set the stage a little bit. It's 800 miles of ocean sailing, and we'll talk about the boat in a minute. 20 miles in South Georgia. It took 5 years in planning. You started with a 6-man team and ended with 2 finishing it. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this, how you came up with this idea, and exactly what it told you about yourself and your outlook on life.
Well, this was, doing this expedition again changed my focus on who I wanted to be in the future, but we can get into that in a minute. It started in 2005, actually, when we have a ship called HMS Endurance, which is the British Antarctic presence in Antarctica every year. It's a ship that's duly employed by the Foreign Commonwealth Office over here and run by the Royal Navy. And it basically surveys, it supports scientific work, it works alongside the Antarctic Treaty, and it's in Antarctica every year. And it's got 122 people on board the ship. And those 122 people need someone with the right skill sets to look after them in Antarctic weather. So they have a Royal Marine Mountain Leader specialist on board of the ship. And in 2005, that's the job I was asked to do. So I spent a year on a ship in Antarctica, which was incredible, looking after people, training them, making sure they've got the right kit, right equipment to be able to go out off the ship and do their job well. And the weather came in, they would know how to look after themselves, etc. You know, you're a survival instructor for the ship in effect. But whilst down there, I fell in love with Antarctica in a way that I just never expected. Just the sheer size of it, the inhospitable nature of it, being a Royal Marine Mountain Leader anyway, and my job was to train and motivate people in these environments. It was something else. But I also started reading and researching about the pioneers and the people who were the first ever to break into those environments. Your Scotts, your Royal Amundsen's, your Shackletons, your Mawsons, pioneers that really, to be honest, didn't have a clue what they were doing when they started launching these first expeditions to penetrate inland Antarctica. You know, with Scott really being the first in 0103 on the Discovery expedition. And I just got fascinated by it. And I was fortunate that I had an opportunity to be flown around on helicopters when pilots were doing training flights and things with my Marines, to be able to land in places where no one had ever stepped foot in the history of our Earth. You know, it was just incredible. I was getting dropped off on massive floating icebergs, you know, and just spending a few hours there just reflecting on the world. And I started learning and reading and becoming passionate about Antarctica and polar history. So my big passions today, I still do lots of lectures and talks on polar history, on Shackleton, as well as my own expeditions. Then roll forward, when you're in that world and you're researching and always learning about these expeditions, I stumbled across the Shackleton Epic expedition, which was to be a recreation of Shackleton's Endurance expedition from 1914 to 1916, where his ship was crushed, sunk to the bottom of the sea, leaving 28 men on a floating ice shelf in Antarctica with no way of talking to the rest of the world about what had happened to them. And this expedition was put together to sort of recreate the final part of that expedition. And it was actually his granddaughter's idea, Alexandra Shackleton. And she approached a guy called Tim Jarvis, who's a dual Australian-British explorer who had some knowledge in reenactment stuff. He did a reenactment of a Douglas Mawson expedition. He was an Australian guy who went through an epic adventure of his own. And so Tim was the guy that was approached. And I can't remember how it happened, but somehow I got wind of the expedition in the very early stages. And I was a sergeant major in the Royal Marines at the time, but I thought, you know what, I've got to see if I can sort of get involved in this somehow, you know, because it just looked incredible. And it was about going back 100 years, literally doing what they did, or the final part of what they did, with only the same clothing, the same technology, navigating by sextant. Now, bearing in mind, this was described as Sir Edmund Hillary as the most remarkable survival journey ever told. You know, so this is like, you know, of global survival stuff that happened in our entire history. This is right up there, you know, this the way in which these guys escaped. And a load of modern adventurers wanted to go and have a go. You know, it just seemed bonkers and mad, but really appealing at the same time. So I sent him an email and I said, look, this is me. I got his email address. This is who I am. I've heard you putting a team together for this expedition. I'm very interested in becoming, you know, any support to you in any way which I can. I knew we had to cross the mountain ranges of South Georgia as well as a team, not just cross an 800-mile ocean. And he needed a proper mountaineer, of which I was, and I knew South Georgia reasonably well. And when he looked at my CV and discovered who had sent him this email, he went, yeah, bang, immediately, of course you can, you're in. Where am I going to get another one of you from, sort of thing. And it was like, and then I became Tim's right-hand man on the expedition for the next 4 years. Eventually it became a discovery documentary. You've got to get these things funded. I think it probably cost $3 or $4 million to put together. And the fact that sponsors know it's going to be a discovery documentary, then they're willing to commit money to it because they're going to get the airtime, and all of that sort of stuff. And then slowly, one by one, we had Seb Coulthard, who was a Navy guy. Everyone else were completely civilians. We had an embedded documentary guy, Ed Wardle. We then had two of the most phenomenal sailors on the planet, Nick Bubb and Paul Larson, who were absolutely legends. I think they got about 10 world records between them for solo around the world yachting and everything. You couldn't ask for more experience to handle this 23-foot boat in the roughest ocean on the planet, traveling from Elephant Island, one of the most remote parts of our world, across 800 miles of the roughest ocean on the planet to a tiny little island called South Georgia, just getting thrown around like a cork in a storm. It was just unbelievable. Shackleton had no right whatsoever to pull this journey off, and nor did we. And just the sheer tenacity of the team and the way we gelled and worked together. This is testament to Shackleton picking the right people for the task at the time. He's an incredible leader. That's what he's sort of renowned for and remembered for now. And Tim Jarvis just had a knack of putting the right team together with the right people that could work together in the right way with the right skill sets to be able to pull something like this off. But it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous, and I loved every bit of it. And unfortunately, when we arrived at South Georgia, so we were the first team to ever unsupported do this in the style they did 100 years prior. And it was all about the 100th anniversary, which is why we were doing it, of the original expedition. We arrived in King Haakon Bay on South Georgia, the wrong side of the island, because obviously that's what they did. Because there's a fear if they went past the island, the boat couldn't tack into wind, and it could have just been blown out to sea. It could only sort of move with the wind and tides, which is why, although there were closer places that they could have raised the alarm, they couldn't actually get to them because you need a proper sailboat to do that, or an engine, or if you're fighting against winds and tides, you had to know what the prevailing tide and winds were and pick something on that line, and that was South Georgia. But 3 of our guys succumbed to really bad trench foot, which is caused by cold, wet and static conditions, and that's basically what we were in all the time slightly hypothermic, all the time slightly shaking, all the time piss wet through for 16 days with no sleep hardly, and your body just slowly sort of depleting and wasting away whilst you're trying to navigate and make sure you stay on the right track using only a sextant and astral navigation. And the trench foot on 3 of the team was too bad by the time we hit South Georgia for them to carry on. We had to walk across a mountain range, and they couldn't get their boots on. Their feet had swollen so much, for the expedition. So that only left me and Tim Jarvis to do this thing authentically in the original clothing. And Paul Larson did join us because his feet were fine, but he joined us in modern gear because only 3 of us were actually ever going to cross in the authentic gear. It would have been Tim, myself, and Ed Wardle. But Paul Larson came and joined us because he wanted to do it. But he wore modern gear. It didn't give us any advantage, but so 3 of us crossed the island, which again was absolutely unbelievable. Falling through crevasses, getting pulled out with Tim on the old Manila rope, and it was just, there was a point on that expedition which still to this day is the lowest, most fatigued, most frightened, most tired I've ever been in my life, was on that expedition, on that mountain, crossing those peaks, dressed like we were, and as fatigued and as tired as we were. But like Shackleton, who had an absolute epic crossing South Georgia, we also did. But somehow, just with pure persistence, we walked into Stromness Harbour, where he walked into to raise the alarm to get his entire 22 men left back in Elephant Island rescued. It still took months for them to do that, but he did bring every single man back alive. Hence, it's an amazing survival story. That was still to this day, physically and mentally, the toughest thing I've ever done. And I've done some other bonkers challenges since then. But that either was going to send me on this expedition journey, or it was going to put me off for life. Don't get me wrong, I don't go near small boats anymore, but I still love the land based stuff, which is my comfort zone. And it was to meet his granddaughter at the end of this expedition at his grave in Grytviken Harbour, because that's where he's buried now, because he died in 1922 on his final expedition quest, 48 years old. He had a massive heart attack and passed away. His wife Emily suggested that he should be buried in South Georgia, and that's where he is buried. So our team stood around his grave in South Georgia with his granddaughter, having completed what we just completed. Was one of the finest moments of my life, I think.
Let's talk about the supplies that you had on this. I think you're brushing over it a little easy. It's woolen clothes, old leather boots with screws driven into them to give you the grip, thin windproof outer layer, 50 meters of the manila rope that you're talking about, and you had a prismatic compass.
Yeah, and an old carpenter's adze, which Tim carried, a big old wooden thing with a big metal bit on the top that they used to use for carving wood, which he basically used as an ice axe and an anchor, to secure ourselves in the snow when we needed to, when we're going down steep descents and things. But yeah, it was exactly as they wore. It was the same clothing that they would have had available to them, designed and built in the same way. So we had no modern technology or modern clothing or experience, or GPSs, navigational systems to know where we were. We had none of that.
I've watched part of the documentary, and just watching going over in the ship with the hull pretty much exposed to water coming into it, because water is pouring into it at certain points. I guess I'm just trying to understand, with all the stuff you'd seen, you said this was the most epic thing you've ever done. What is it about this that makes you want to do it so bad? Because there's very few people in the world that do this. So I've got to understand what it is about this that drives you.
It is a certain personality type. I'll give you that. It's not for everybody. A lot of people will attempt to do stuff like this and then never again. Others will be spurred on to do more of it. And for me, it's about understanding your mindset, your personality, and who you are as an individual. I probably learned more about myself and my capabilities on this expedition than ever before. A lot of it I put down to Royal Marine Commando culture from day one, from a 16-year-old boy. The way in which they start to train your mindset and show you how to, get over impossible things every single day. You start to create a pattern. You start to have an attitude of I can do this and I can get over this, and I've faced failure so many times. And the best way for me for dealing with fear is to regularly push your comfort zone. And if you're regularly pushing your comfort zone, your mind sort of just gets used to accepting hardship. It can push through more and more and more. I can't go from 18-year-old boy to Shackleton Epic, but the journey I've been on and all the experiences I had in these elite, horrific environments that would take my mindset to a different level, pushing my comfort zone regularly, has given me the opportunity to push it that little bit further every time. So it's been like a stepping stone journey of mental maturity to get to a point where you can push a little bit further. You can push a little bit further. So I ended up, when I did sort of some of my bigger stuff in Antarctica, where I've been physically more challenged, I've been less mentally challenged because of the journey that I've been on before, and I found it easier to cope with, even though it was physically harder. So going through these journeys, build that mental maturity, and once you get through them and you don't give up on them and you fight through that hurdle and get over that wall, it then triggers something in your mind that just gives you this inner belief and ability that you can almost do anything. And I just love exploring my mind, my capabilities, what I can actually do and what I really am capable of. Exploring that area of physical human resilience and determination is something I've just become passionate about, and then helping other people to overcome hurdles in their own lives on a much smaller scale is something that I spend a lot of time doing now. The whole mindset, resilience piece, which I really love doing. And and I get a buzz out of that as well, using my experiences to help other people overcome their hurdles and issues. And it's what this thing can do when when you want it to do, is just incredible. Where it can go when the alternative is death or complete failure, and you have to push, and you've got no choice but to get through this. Then something, just especially with me, gets me through every time, and you can't always explain it, but it's a buzz nonetheless.
All right, I got to ask you kind of the $1,000,000 question of it, and we're going to get on to some of your other expeditions, but you said you learned about yourself, you learned who you were and stuff. So I guess the question would be to ask you, what did you learn? Who are you?
Yeah, I think I'm still really that sort of young, quiet, slightly shy guy, because I've had moments, where I've been life and soul of the party and all that sort of stuff. But I think what I've learned now, as approaching 50 years old next month, is I'm still really deep down that young, sort of quiet, slightly socially uncomfortable person. But I built and learnt a set of skills and tools given to me by my career and experiences I've had to deal with whatever scenario and situation is thrown in front of me. I don't have that fear anymore, or that perception of what other people think about me anymore, which gives me the strength to sort of push on and try anything once and not worry or fear about failing anything. And I just know now that I have this inner determination, this inner belief and inner strength and mindset that will get me through anything if I prepare in the right way and put myself at the start line of anything in the right way. And if I fail at something, I can quite often take you right back to the moment or to the reasons why. It would have been something to do with lack of attitude or lack of preparation or not putting the right time and effort into it, or being a little bit lazy. You sort of know, you never admit it to people, but you know inside if it's down to you and your lack of preparation. And if you do everything right and you're in these, really tough scenarios and situations, then you've got a much better chance of getting through them. And I think just my career and my experiences have put me now in a position where I'm not stupid, I'm not complacent, I'm not unsafe. I'm just very understanding of who I am and what I'm capable of. And I don't take other people into my world and into my scenarios, my extreme scenarios, unless I know they've got the same mindset, same skill sets as I have, because then that just becomes dangerous, which is probably why I do a lot of my stuff now solo. Finding someone else daft enough to walk alongside me to do these things, is getting harder and harder as you push more and more. But and again, that is a huge part of the whole mindset journey that I've been on, is the learning how to be out there, fatiguing yourself for 10 to 12 hours a day, burning 10,000 calories a day on your own, for day after day after day in these wilderness expanses of Antarctica. That's taken a lot of time as well to be able to build the mental maturity to do that, which is why I couldn't take on these challenges as a young kid, because I wasn't mature enough. I was probably physically as fit and as determined, but I didn't have the mindset growth yet or the mental maturity to be able to withstand the hardships, which I now have, and that's what makes the difference. So I probably wouldn't physically prepare for something now as well as I would have done in my early 20s, but I'll mentally prepare so much better, and that's actually the bit that gets you through.
So, as you say, these challenges are getting tougher and tougher. They're getting more and more complex. It's taking longer to set them up, train for them, get them ready. Some people would look at that and say, with it being more difficult, you getting older, very hard for you to bring someone in on it with you, that you have a quote unquote death wish. I don't know if that's the right thing. I want to know what you think about that, though, because you continue to push the envelope further and further that you can. So at a certain point, do you think that there's a cutoff point, or do you think that until they put you in the ground, you're going to continue to push those?
No, I mean, it's like I said before, it's a stepping stone journey for me. It's a journey I've built up. So when I push to the next level, it's because I'm filling in the gaps before I get there. I'm not taking these huge leaps to doing something ridiculous without doing the homework, if you like, beforehand. So all my expeditions have been gradual. So if to the untrained eye, if you look at what I'm going to do next, you think that's just mental. But actually, if you look at the journey I've been on up to that point, and actually really delve into what I've done to get there, then you realize, oh, well, actually, for him, that's the next step. It's the next progression. And I use the analogy of being a chief executive officer in a big business. You don't walk in as the 16, 17-year-old T-boy and become the CEO the next week. But the journey he has to go on for the next 35 years or 40 years to give him the skill sets and the knowledge and the understanding of how to run a business of that size puts him in a position eventually to get into that next step, a step that he would have believed as a 17-year-old was impossible. And it's no different in the expedition world, really. If you do the focus training and the courses and the expeditions right, and you build up in the right way, then these challenges can become more challenging and further and longer and harder. And that's what I've done, basically. So I'm ready to take on my next challenge. And my next challenge is one that is, yes, it's extreme to the untrained eye, but it's the next step for me. And I've done the homework and the background to be able to get there and give it a try. And like I say, I go back to my polar history passion for Shackleton and Scott and all that sort of stuff. And I want to do something pioneering like they did. I want to do stuff that's never been done before, pushing that envelope of endurance, those pioneering people. And if we didn't have adventurous, spirited souls like myself and thousands of people before me in human history, we'd all still be sat in caves, wouldn't we? Someone has to go out there and do this stuff and find out these things, whether it be scientists, discovering for new drugs and things. They're pushing the envelopes. They're in labs, some of these guys working 18, 19-hour days for weeks and months on end to come up with solutions. That's mentally as tough and as challenging as some of the stuff I do. The people who are trying to design the cures for this COVID virus we've had recently, the stresses and strains that have been put on them to come up with a solution while millions of people around the world are dying, is incredibly challenging on the mindset, and it's so I do compare my journeys, although they're physical and look extremely extreme, to sort of any walk of life where people are reaching the pinnacle of their career from a lifetime of research and work. And this has been a lifetime of research and preparation and work. It's not ever just been done on a whim. And I do take it seriously, and I do value my life, and I'm not going into these things to put myself in a position where I'm at risk of killing myself, because that would be ridiculous. I do have a wife, I do have children and a family, which I take very seriously. But it's just sort of who I've become now.
I've heard you say about when you do these, because in 2018, 2019, you did 730 miles, 38 days. You were the third fastest person in history to do it. You skied solo and unsupported to the South Pole. I just wanted to kind of set that up so people understand what we're talking about. But I've heard you say in interviews, and you've written a couple times, that you don't do it for the speed. You don't do it to set the record. You don't do it for that kind of stuff. You do it to show yourself what you can do. But I want to go back to when we talked about people worry about failure, they worry about what people will say. And I want to flip that coin over and ask you, do you worry without all of this stuff that people will forget about you, and you're trying to make that lasting legacy happen? Because a lot of us out there are trying to make that legacy for our children, for our family, for generations to come. As much as you love Shackleton and all those stories, do you think you're trying to set that up yourself?
No, for me, not really. Not at all. I actually get quite a kick out of being a person who's about to attempt something, pushing human endurance boundaries in Antarctica next year, and no one knows who I am. I quite like that, and where did this guy come from? A huge amount of what I've done has been in the background, and has been quite, I don't go around shouting from the rooftops about who I am and what I'm going to do.
Right.
I won't even launch a website or really talk about it until I know it's going to be funded and done. And the only reason I quite often have to make it public is because you need sponsor support, and sponsors need the public profile. If I could just get the money from somewhere and just quietly go about doing this, then I would quietly go about doing this. And the reason for that is I love nothing more than to inspire through adventure. I think that's what I call it. I do a lot of work with schools, a lot of work with children, not necessarily the top schools with big budgets that can afford for all these big glorious explorers to come in and spend time with their children, but more the state schools, the smaller schools that don't have opportunities to have people come in and inspire their kids and children. And I've done many hundreds and hundreds of visits to schools, where you just don't know who the next Rand Fiennes is, or who the next, whoever is sitting in that audience. And go back to that 14-year-old, I was inspired in a moment by a Royal Marine talking to me. It changed my life. And every time I go into an audience of young school children, from, harsh backgrounds or whatever, you don't know who you're inspiring. Not to go and do what I do, but just to get up and have the confidence to do something, to make the most out of life. And I do that with, a lot of my clients now are 40-somethings, 50-something men that have basically focused their entire life on business and forgot how to have that adventure, forgot what nature's all about, or how to have a life. And I genuinely have people that are inspired by what I do because of how I use those expeditions to enhance their lives as well. And if I can't do that, then there is not a lot of point to doing the expeditions for me. So it's not about the glory. Genuinely, it's not about medals. It's not about the biggest house in the top of the biggest street and having the best holidays and the best cars, because I live actually a very humble life, really. And I make enough money to make life comfortable and to be able to train and focus on preparing for that next adventure. But it's what those adventures give me and what these expeditions give me beyond the success of doing them that I like, And I was with a group of corporates just 2 nights ago, inspiring about my expeditions, trying to inspire them. It's not look at what I do, but it's look at what you can do if you have a different mindset and focus in a different way and use some of the skills and tools that I've developed in my head over the years to help you improve and get better in whatever area you need to improve or get better in. And I genuinely get a real buzz and kick out of doing that, and it makes the expeditions worthwhile.
I look at guys like you and Tip and a lot of people that I've interviewed on the show, and I feel like I've done things in life. I've been in the military. I've been in law enforcement for almost 2 decades. I've done things, but I look at you guys and I just look in awe at you guys and these stories that you have and the things that you've done. And I feel like that's the stories that need to be out there in the world. You say that you don't start websites until it's ready and stuff, but I feel like if more guys like you took the time to write books, to tell people about this, these are the stories that need to last into the future instead of the stuff that's going around in the world today. And like I said, when I talk to you guys and I have these conversations, I'm just in awe of what you've done. And I look at me and say, wow, I haven't even taken a tenth of what these guys have done.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's really well received, and it's sort of nice to get that sort of feedback. And again, it's done in a very, I think Royal Marines are generally just quite humble people anyway. They're not an organisation that has to shout about from the rooftops about how good they are and how great soldiers they are. They just go about their business and they just go and do their job professionally, and then they come home and they get on with it. And the majority of us, grow up with that mindset, with that culture, with that, we're just quietly confident at what we do. We know how to prepare to do something, and we prepare to do it well to the best of our ability every time, which is why we have so much success as an organization, which is then drilled into you as a person and as a culture, and I've chosen to take my life down a particular road that I enjoy, that I get a kick out of, and that I use to help other people. Some people may comment and view what I do differently, and have other ideas and suggestions about what they think. You always get those couch potatoes that like to sit there and never leave their homes, but they're the biggest experts in the world, and they'll quite happily tap all over social media all day, and you're just like, that stuff to me is just, it's going to happen. People are out there who are going to behave in that way because that's who they are as people. I really don't give a toss about that. It just goes straight over my head. I know I know who I am. I know what kind of life I've had, and I know who I want to be and continue to go on being. And that's all I'm going to do. It's got nothing to do with anyone else, And I know I inspire. I know I help a lot of kids and youth organisations, and I know I help a lot of businessmen these days, become better versions of themselves. And that's enough for me.
All right, let's kind of wrap this whole thing up and talk about what you have planned next, because like I said, this is an amazing thing that's getting ready to happen. So let's set up. You tell me what you're planning, how you're planning to do it, and when we're going to make this happen.
Okay, so my solo trip to the South Pole in 2018-19 was one in which was phase one of a much bigger project. And that project is to be the first solo unsupported person to cross the entire Antarctic continent. So it's, Antarctica's broken down into various sort of markers. You've got outer Antarctica and inner Antarctica. So if you were to take away the permanent ice of Antarctica, underneath there somewhere would be a series of islands and a landmass. But it just happens to have 10,000 feet of ice on top of it. It's 2,800 meters high at the South Pole. So inner Antarctica, if you like, would be where the landmass would end, the geographical landmass underneath, but outer Antarctica is where all the permanent ice, not the sea that melts and falls with the season, but the actual permanent ice that covers Antarctica is known as outer Antarctica. So no one has gone from outer Antarctica to the pole to outer Antarctica on the other side, sea to sea, where a boat can drop you off and pick you up, unsupported and solo. It's still never been done. And it's been done solo, but using kites and using wind assistance to pull you along, but never just by man hauling and pulling everything for the whole duration. There's a young guy, Sam Cox, who's also a Royal Marine, who's going down there. He actually left yesterday the UK to attempt to break the current record, so he's going to go from outer Antarctica to the South Pole to inner Antarctica. So inner South Pole sound, it does get a bit complicated, but inner South Pole, the geographical crossing has been done solo unsupported. Sam is going to attempt to push the boundaries of that, and I'm attempting to push the boundaries of all expeditions for solo travel. So to go from one side truly to the other side, which will be a journey of around 2,800 kilometers. It's going to take me 100 days to do this, 100 to 105 days of carrying 100 days of food, 100 days of fuel, 100 days of everything to pull this off. Whether it's possible, I don't know, but like we've said earlier in the podcast, I will just make sure that I'm the best version of myself and the best prepared with all of the experience I've had when I stand on that start line on day one, to give myself the best opportunity to pull this off. And I'm confident it can be done. I know very few people on the planet have got the experience and the mindset to do this, and I do believe I'm one of them. The company that back me, ALE, Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, have authorised the expedition, and it's up to them whether they want to support you and think you've got the experience to do this or not. And because of the way I performed in 2018-19, they have the confidence in me to give it a go, or at least know that I know when enough is enough and I have to raise the flag and end the expedition. So it's there for the taking. It's something I want to do, like the pioneers of the past, trying to do things that had never been done before. This is probably the last remaining enduring journey on land in Antarctica that's yet to be completed, and I'm just ready to give it a go, and that's what I'm going to try and do in October next year, 24.
What's the load that we're looking at? What's the load that you're going to carry? How much are you pulling? Because I know that I've seen some videos of you and what you're doing, and it almost seems to me like you're kind of your own sled team and dragging it behind you. Yeah. Is that in essence how it works?
That's exactly what you do. You've got a big sled behind you, and you're just pulling everything that you need to survive for 100 days with you. Your tents, your sleeping bags, your skis, your spare kit, your cookers, your fuel, your satellite phones, your solar panels. Everything's in there. The biggest burden, obviously, is the food and the fuel. So if you go to Antarctica for a week or 2 weeks, pretty much everything will be the same. It's just the amount of food and fuel you take to sustain yourself for a longer period. Now, if you go back 20 years, we didn't have the ability to get the weight of a sled down enough to pull it a decent distance. The sleds were too heavy because technology hasn't got down to the level it has now. Whereas now our cookers are so much more efficient, and the metals we use to boil and melt snow in are so much more efficient, that we can carry so much less fuel now because we can cook our meals so much quicker. The food is becoming so much more nutritional, but packed into much smaller packs now. So the weight of the food for 100 days is so much less than it used to be. Tents are getting lighter and stronger. Skis are getting lighter and stronger. Clothing is getting more efficient, lighter and stronger. So as technology improves over the years, the weight of what you have to pull behind you is getting lower and lower and lower, to the point now where I think we've got to a point where I can get everything maybe down to 105, 155, 160 kilos on day one. But if you go back 20 years, that would potentially have been well over 200 kilos, which meant you just couldn't pull it far enough in the early part of the expedition to have any chance of getting all the way across. So I have to average 18 nautical miles a day for the whole expedition. And at the start of it, I may be doing 5 or 6, which means that average starts building up. So I've got a target of getting to the South Pole in 65 days and giving myself then 35 days to do the same distance away from the pole to the other side. So if you imagine your sled is so much lighter, you've got the wind on your back, you're going downhill, and I've already done that distance going to the pole in 38 days. So, it on paper it works out, but it's not in reality like that, because you've also got 65 days of mindset and body fatigue to deal with as well, which sort of counters out, the muscle loss and the weight loss and all of those sorts of things. So it's treading new territory, it's treading new ground. There's no book I can read to help me get through this. No one's done this before. You can't take advice and ask people, how do you do this? Because no one's done it before. So you have to write the book. You have to go through the preparation and the program and just hope that the experience you've got and the journey you've been on is enough to once again, when you hit that wall, to be able to climb over it, or know where the door is to walk through it, because that's what it's about. Is hitting that hurdle and using that entire life's experience and that entire life's work in this environment, to find a way through that wall when I hit it, because I know I will hit it at some point.
Well, and once again, you gloss over what you've done. You have actually built stoves that are better now. It's your design that has gotten lighter. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you have to. So, I got introduced to a great friend in, a contact of a great friend who's an ex-Marine, who's got a friend who works in a metalsmiths company, and he's got access to all the tools, all the gear, and the knowledge to help me sit around. So it's about maximizing the heat from the stove, not losing any of that heat to the environment, and making sure it all goes into the pot to melt your snow as quickly as possible, so you can turn it off and save fuel, which means your fuel bill is going to be less, which means the weight you carry on day one is going to be a lot less. So the more efficient you can make it, the better. And there's no real market for this, because it doesn't really matter if it takes an extra 30 seconds normally on a normal expedition to boil a pot of water. It's always good enough, because you're not worried about every single ounce of weight, most of the time. So there's no big market for selling this sort of stuff. So you've got to be quite clever in your design, and you using your experience to start playing with shields. I built one without thinking actually the thing still needs air coming in, and we blocked all of the air out thinking we're sealing all this in, but it didn't have the suction of air coming in. The thing just went out every time we put the shield on. You're like, how do we counter this? So we start poking holes in it, and we just tried so many different things, to the point where I managed to build a shield around a cooker, and I think I boiled a litre of water or something, 3 minutes quicker than anything I could have bought off a shelf. There was nothing around that I could have bought that could have helped me do that. So it's about thinking outside the box. And I probably worked out on a 100-day expedition, this would have saved me something like, maybe 8 or 9 litres of fuel, which is 8 or 9 kilos in weight, just by thinking outside the box with the way you prepare your kit and equipment.
It's amazing just to hear the planning and preparation that goes into this, the exercise that you do every morning, the exercise that you do during the day to get prepared for this, dragging the tires around and all that kind of stuff.
Discipline,
Yeah, you have discipline right now. It's 3:00 in the morning when we started this where you're at, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. But
no, it's been great.
You have just an amazing story. So let's let people know where they can look a little more into you. Of course, you'll be on the website. Of course, we'll do all the pictures that you sent me, all of that kind of stuff. I'll put links to the documentary that's on YouTube that you were talking about. Yep. Where can people, if they want to go and find you, where can they find you? Social media, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Facebook, I just go by Baz Gray, and most of it I just use my name really on social media. So Facebook and Instagram are my sort of two platforms. And Instagram's Barry John Gray. Facebook is Baz Gray. And then on LinkedIn, just look for Barry Gray. And my company name and website is Whiteshod. The word white followed by the word SHOD, Whiteshod, all one word.com. That's the term we use in the military for working in an extreme cold environment. So if I'm on like Dartmoor in a wooded green area, it will be a black shod environment. If we go to Norway in an extreme environment, it's called a white shod environment. And I spent a huge amount of my life in that environment. So I called my business White Shod. So it sort of makes sense to me anyway. But yeah, they're the best places. And then when I do get an expedition funded, then I will create separate web pages where links to all of that information will go on those social media platforms. So it'll be if you follow me, just follow me, then you won't miss when the next expedition's happening.
Well, it's amazing. Guys, you know where you can find Barry Baz Gray. Now, let's talk about where you can find me and kind of wrap this whole thing up. You can, of course, always find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast, and you can find me on YouTube where all these conversations are in video form at the DTD Podcast. But your one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net. You can go there. Barry's going to have his own page. All of his pictures that he sent me, all of his links, anything that you'd want to know about him is going to be there, plus the audio and video of this episode. Now that you know everywhere you can find me, let's talk about my amazing sponsors, the guys that make this happen. Let's start with Mac Belts. We all know that nothing stands up to wear and tear like a good leather belt. If you're looking for the toughest leather belt on earth, then you've come to the right place. Mac Belts. They're handcrafted in the USA by veterans who are serious about their craft. If you're looking for a belt that's tough enough for your active lifestyle and helps support those who've given so much to our country, look no further than Mac Belts. They're the toughest belt on the planet. They're hand-cut veg tan full grain saddle leather dyed to a classic saddle tan. Perfect for everyday wear or any over the waistband or inside the waistband everyday carry. The finest quality American craftsmanship that positively impacts military charities. We all know the owner, Mac Alexander, my buddy, retired Navy SEAL. Make sure you go over to macbelts.com, pick you up one today. I wear one every single day. Now let's talk coffee. Police Coffee, it's an officer-owned business, and it's dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends, and they're shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch is roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant, and their specialty coffees do not waste one drop when flavor's concerned. Their coffee's some of the best you'll find, but it also serves an important cause. They give back to my community. 50% of their profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. Now let's talk flavor. One Ranger, newest flavored coffee you're sure to love. One Ranger is a flavorful, medium-bodied coffee with a smooth and sweet pecan flavor. It's probably the best combination in the world. It's rich, sweet, nutty, and buttery, and its flavor cuts through coffee's natural acidity to give you a smooth and satisfying coffee experience. And everyone knows it's pumpkin spice time. You can also get that there. So when you go over to policecoffee.com, they have K-Cups, ground, beans, everything that you could possibly need to drink a cup of coffee, including pumpkin spice for this season, is there. DJ K10 will get you 10% off your order. Make sure you go by macbelts.com, policecoffee.com. Pick up their stuff because they make this show happen every week. Guys, that's going to be it for me. That's Barry. I'm DJ. This has been the show. Make sure you catch us on the next one. We're out of here, guys.